Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today we have as a guest the founder of the network, Nick Poliveda. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Hey, Sasha, how you doing?
Okay, very well. Thank you for asking. It's a very, very eventful week so far happening. And I hope we'll have soon Professor Jonathan Lockwood, and hopefully he will join us.
Yeah, he popped out, so he should be on as soon as the computer turns on.
Sure. Okay. So the main event obviously was a visit of President Zelensky to United States. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Sorry, I'm a little late, but glad to be here.
Jonathan, we just started and we are discussing what an eventful week was that with the visit of President Zelensky. Without going into details, give it your impression that just happened in the last 2-3 days. What are your thoughts? How you emotionally perceive this?
Well, thank you for tossing me that live grenade. I just love those live grenades you give me at the beginning of the program. That's okay. The fascinating thing is that Ukraine is steadily and increasingly on the verge of creating that decisive operational breakthrough, and that everything seems to be hanging in the balance. The world seems to be holding its breath, waiting for the success of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, because they're afraid to commit themselves entirely until they know what is going to happen on the battlefield, and that I know for certain. And it is becoming increasingly likely, given the events that we have just been witnessing, just in now currently, as the Ukrainians are seeming to be breaking through on the decisive front, that now this may be the last little nudge. It may be a close run decision, but the West will back its way into decisively supporting Ukraine, because the Ukrainians have proven remarkably adept at being able to make the absolute most of what they have been given and successfully adapting their strategy to their means and goals. So my belief, my emotional feeling right now is that one of cautious but increasing optimism about the potential success of Ukraine in achieving both its military and its political objectives, because the Russians are showing signs of increasing strain, particularly with the latest naval events in the Black Sea, that have not been publicized quite as much. But the Ukrainians are steadily practicing a strategy of sea control denial to the Russian Black Sea fleet and destroying their infrastructure. That is having its effect as well. So again, my attitude is one of cautious optimism, but that optimism is increasing as we observe the events on the battlefield and on the Black Sea. And the reticence of Ukraine's Western allies to provide additional aid seems to be diminishing. And despite all the other reservations they might have and the unexpected nature of the conflict in which the Western allies currently find themselves involved, nevertheless, the Ukrainians are taking control of their own destiny. Nick, what do you think?
Oh, tossed
a grenade to you.
And toss a grenade to me, but
right.
Wait until I will get HIMARS instead of grenades.
I was going to say the thing.
HIMARS are ITACMs. It doesn't matter which. The Ukrainians will make the absolute most.
A lot of toys that they could send over. First of all, in the F-35s, at least the stats I read, we have 1,000 F-35s. I mean, to send them 100, we still have like 900, at least according to Wikipedia.
Nick,
I can't
Nick,
believe
it
how
doesn't matter. For the Ukrainians, it doesn't matter. The Ukrainians have shown no matter which toy they get, they're going to make the max. They're going to
They'll
make
make the
better
maximum
use of it than we would expect.
I want them to have air superiority. Okay. Now the real problem is
This ain't Burger King, Nick.
You know,
you don't
give
get it your
them
way.
air superiority. Give them that. Well, on the same time, you have people in the United States. They're going, well, I'm not sure what we should do. You know, they don't get. And I guess it's because they've never traveled.
It doesn't hit them up close and personal. They're not. They're the ones whose families are dying.
I'm going to beat on Marjorie Taylor Greene just for example. I don't think she's lived or gone anywhere outside of Podunk, Georgia, except when she made a trip to Washington, D.C. She needs to go and visit these countries. She needs to spend time with these people. She needs to see that they hate her more than any Democrat does. And they would have no problem cutting her head off, slicing her throat, raping her, and sticking her in a bottle. Seriously. And because that's how they deal with people.
I don't think I'd go so far as to say that.
She doesn't get that.
Try to be a little
She's
civilized.
got to feel the pain of what really goes on. And there's a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who are ignorant about how these people really want to deal with you. And it's not funny. They have no problem raping you, cutting your head off, disemboweling you, and sticking you in a grave. And you want to say,
and then they really get nasty.
And your response is, I'm not sure if we should fight that. Come on, guys.
I have one.
You've had to deal with that up in personal.
Just want to comment something about raping. There must be an element of desire for that object to be raped, and I can't imagine.
Marjorie Taylor Greene is a no.
Anybody who would decide,
you know. Okay, but Sasha, I think the realities and the horror of war just doesn't get to half the people in Washington, D.C. And so what they do is they go, well, I don't know. We have to spend money. Are we sure this is going to benefit us? Blah, blah, blah. They go through all this crazy conversation while somebody is sitting there raping their spouse in front of them. I mean, give me a bloody break. These people are not your friends. Hello. So hence, because of that, you have to support them as much as you can in terms of giving them as many weapons as you can, including the F-16s, the F-35s, the HIMARS, the A-10 Warthogs. Send them the whole bloody package. Because one thing bullies respond to is force. In other words, there's absolutely no question. If somebody punches you in the face, you got to punch them back harder.
And Nick, you're reinforcing.
I'm missing something, John.
No, you're not. Nick, you're just reinforcing the point, the historical point that Winston Churchill once made. When he said that his study of the Russians is that the Russians, there's nothing that the Russians respect more than strength, and nothing that the Russians despise more than weakness. Particularly military weakness. So you're right on the head. You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah,
the Russians must be confronted forcefully.
Yeah, and part of the reason why this whole thing exists is the history of what happened in Afghanistan. In other words, the United States goes, well, we're out, and they tuck their little tail and they live. Actually, which I thought was a successful mission over 10 years. We did something the Russians couldn't do, no one could do. We basically put a kibosh on Afghanistan. And then all of a sudden we tuck our legs between our tails and we walk away. Well, what does Putin say? That's weakness, doesn't he?
Correct.
And here's another sign of weakness. Putin walks into the Crimea and takes it. And what does the West do? Nothing. More weakness. So then naturally he goes, I guess Ukraine is, Zelensky doesn't like me. Okay, that's fine. I'll just take over his country. And unfortunately, that didn't work. Okay. But the thing is,
he got surprised. He miscalculated.
He's responding to the weakness of the West.
Correct.
So you don't have any choice. If you're not going to do this, then, and Poland gripes me. I mean, come on, Poland, you have to 100% support this effort, because remember, Poland, and you know this, John, in World War II, Russia ripped the other half out of their gonads. They took the other half. Germany took the other half, and they tore Poland.
They divided up Poland.
They divided and killed tons of Poles. So Russia isn't like, oh, what a nice little country. Now, I visited it, and I thought, oh, what a nice little country. until, of course, I got robbed over there. And then I thought maybe it's not. And I got to visit the prisons. Okay. And by the way, the prisons were clean.
Nick,
I have to. They
Nick,
were clean. But
Nick,
come on, man.
Nick,
This is not
chill
a
for a second, okay?
country.
Nick,
What?
my former Russian history professor, Dr. Spironis, in my undergraduate class at University of Tampa, his ancestry was Greek and Ukrainian. Okay, okay, and he was on Patton's staff in World War II as a lieutenant. And one of the things was he says the Russians are animals. I thought he was exaggerating for effect at the time, being a naive undergraduate student. Then as I studied the events of World War II and did further studies as an intelligence officer, I discovered that my Russian history professor was not exaggerating, not in the least.
Yeah. I mean, Ivan the Terrible wasn't Ivan the Wonderful, was he? Okay. I mean,
He wasn't called Ivan the Terrible just because of his personality. No.
Because his personality. But the thing is, so when we're facing, and we saw what they did in the Ukraine and the horror that they create when they go in places. We're even witnessing it today, where they indiscriminately bomb places. You know, you cannot treat this lightly. And unfortunately, this is what I'm seeing the problem, Sasha, is our friends in Washington, D.C., the Neville Chamberlains that exist. Well, we don't know if we should spend any money on this, trying to fight this guy called
Hell, we're already spending it like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah. And you know, the U.S. budget is so big. I mean, our military budget is $800 billion, and we've spent maybe $100 billion. We haven't spent 1/8 of our budget? We have plenty of money to throw out, and we should throw in more. Okay. And put this bully back in his place. Now, somebody could argue, well, you know, he's afraid because Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania became part of NATO. Well, think about it. Why would they become part of NATO? Because
they were afraid of them.
Because they don't like, okay, it's real honestly, they don't like their women raped, okay, and they don't like being disemboweled, and they don't like their heads cut off. That's the reason they're part of NATO. So let's just get real. How Russia responds is the reason why Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and the West exist. They exist.
It's the reason why every country in the East that is closest to Russia, why, number one, if they were given their honest wish list, they would have ballistic missile defenses on their territory. Absolutely. They would have ballistic missile defenses, and they would also have, if they could get them, if they could get a promise getting them, they would have American troops, even if at a symbolic level, stationed in every country that borders Russia.
Yeah,
because along with a commitment by the Americans to use nuclear weapons in defense of them if the Russians invade. Now, that is the strongest possible deterrent, short of what I've been advocating on previous programs, the joint efforts of the U.S. and NATO to create a global ballistic missile defense system that is capable of doing the thing that Russia fears most: neutralize its nuclear arsenal and render it, in the words of the late President Ronald Reagan, render it impotent and obsolete.
Yeah, and it's really sad that it's come down to this, but it is what it is. Because I actually, Sasha, I did enjoy going to St. Petersburg. I enjoyed the Hermitage. I loved the art, the canals. I mean, it was a beautiful city, and for the most part, the people were pretty nice, except the robber barons that existed. And you could tell they were working cahoots with the police, so that made it even worse. Talk about corruption. You know, the police work with the robbers to make sure that Americans get robbed. But at the same time, the realities of the situation today are totally different. You know, I went during the time when we actually had pretty good relationships with Russia, and Russia wasn't as crazy as they are today. So now it's different time, different things. So put it to them, baby. They need to get out of Ukraine or just bomb every centimeter until they're out.
Okay, anyway. So here is a question. Remember what's happened at the end of First World War, when Germany was totally destroyed, humiliated, the Versailles Peace, and so on. We know the story, and that led to rise of Hitler and the horrible Second World War. So the supposedly the humiliation of Germany after First World War led to rise of Hitler and Second World War. Now, if Germany would be treated differently, more peacefully, more respectfully, and so on, maybe there would not be Second World War. Well, we don't know that, and unfortunately, we'll never find out. But we can talk about it at least. So, what's happened with Russia when Soviet Union has collapsed in 1991? There was no humiliation of Russia, which was next to nothing. It was one of the poorest country that didn't have $10,000 to pay for a shipload of grain going to St. Petersburg from Rotterdam, and all they had to pay $10,000 port charges, and they didn't have bloody $10,000. They had to call cabinet of ministers with Yeltsin, Chubais, and everyone who was close to the power. Even Yegor Gaidar attended that meeting, and that where he put in his book the death of an empire. Excellent book where he shows exactly why Soviet Union fell apart and so on. Now, so after 1991, neither United States or NATO or anybody else humiliated Russia, which was on that knees and ready for picking and taken apart. No, actually, United States helped Russia at that time a lot and sent advisors. Some people are not happy with this particular advisors or so on. But anyway, there was no trace of any humiliation or any attempts to take advantage of Russia or so on. And yet, slowly but surely, Russia became very hostile to the United States and the West. Its first burst in Putin's speech in Munich in 2007, and then 2008, war in Georgia, 2014, Ukraine, 2015, Syria. And now, while West, United States, celebrated the victory in Cold War, basically there was no major enemies because USSR is no more. Russia is well contained. The other republics don't mean much. And yet Russia became so hostile to the West.
And I might point out at this point, Sasha, that no less a person than Henry Kissinger. And now he's 100 years old, but in the early 90s, shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union, he warned that Russia, this is no cause, the collapse of the Soviet Union is no cause for celebration, that eventually Russia would begin to reassert itself because of the inherent mass of numbers of its people and its massive resources, and the essentially authoritarian nature of its leadership, that inevitably that Russia would begin to attempt to reassert itself on the world stage. And this prediction, I cited this prediction in my book, The Russian View of U.S. Strategy, and that prediction has come true. They are trying to reassert themselves using their nominal superiority in nuclear weapons in terms of numbers of nuclear weapons in their arsenal. They're trying to use that as their main means of political leverage. They call their nuclear deterrence force. Their word for deterrence, remember, is intimidation. That's how they translate deterrence. And that is a much more aggressive interpretation of deterrence than we in the United States think of when we think of the word deterrence. We tend to think of it, help me with that word again, I have trouble with that word, but it means to restrain or hold in check. That is more of the sense that the American word deterrence means, and which the Russians at first tried translating it that way until they settled for ustrashenia, which is how they translate for their own forces. So in any case, that's what... Jonathan,
you see, this is something as a good student of Russian studies, you should appreciate that maybe we are talking about the phenomenon of Russian internal aggression, that the Russian people, that essentially, whether it's Yeltsin, Putin, or whoever has this power, they cannot go against majority of people, how they feel about themselves, their countries, their leaders, so on. They must they can help to formulate the certain agenda, but that agenda has to sit well with the majority of people. So that would make him even more popular. He would easily win any election. I mean, there is no election, but whatever it is, he's going to win it anyway. It's kind of a political process, because election means that there are two or more candidates, and each one is trying to announce his agenda or her, and explain the positives about this agenda. In Russia, there is no such process, never was. All the state means, like radio, television, everything else, repeat only one line, that of existing leader. They don't give any time to anybody else, and also there were cases where somebody like Navalny was trying to get elected. We know where Navalny is today. And what I'm trying to say is that Russia is a unique country in a way that it has all means to deal with any aggression against itself because of nuclear arsenal and many other things. Okay, so try to just build a just, a happy society, increase your economics or so on. No, they would never do that. They would just put all their efforts into preparation to a new aggression. And basically what they're doing, they're fighting war of 19th century, where there is nothing but a land grab. And
I have to agree with you, because when you look at the Russian word for their word for security, bezopasnost, which is translated as without danger, that is a much more absolute concept of security than we in the West are used to. When we think of security, we think of in a relative sense, relative freedom from danger. They think of it as without danger. So in other words, for the Russian state to be secure in its own perception, then all of its neighbors must by definition be insecure, be made to feel insecure or weak or subservient, because Russia thrives on that. And unfortunately, if all of its neighbors are weak or subservient, then of course that just feeds the natural Russian tendency to expand and enhance its own sense of bezopasnost.
Jonathan, what's interesting is that at least one country where a Russian way of implementation and extending power, and fairly successfully was for many, many years, Finland. There was even such a concept of Finlandization, which would mean be nice, be polite, never cross the line. And where all that led, that Finland today is a member of NATO?
And it probably is going to be a much more aggressive and assertive member of NATO relative to Russia. Yeah. And I'm just willing to bet that Finland is going to quietly under the table, or maybe not so quietly, request and get ballistic missile defenses and possibly even American presence in Finland. But that would be a real popular place for American troops to station themselves. But because Finland it's a wonderful country. And despite its proximity to Russia, they have relative freedom, they have security, and because now they have decided to enhance their security by joining NATO and realizing that if Russia succeeds in Ukraine and is somehow rewarded for its aggression, that Finland and Sweden and those other Eastern members of NATO realize that they will be next.
And then NATO and US would have to really get directly involved with the risk of lives.
We would have to remember, we have to keep in mind the historical, shall we say, what if lesson of Munich in 1938. Had the Western Allies had the political will to put their foot down and go to war against Nazi Germany in 1938, while there was still time to knock them off balance and possibly eliminate them before they became too powerful, our failure to do so resulted in the deaths of tens of millions in the Second World War because we did not act in time. This is a lesson in the 21st century where Russia is repeating the historical example of Nazi Germany. They are pushing, we must not reward them for their aggression in the least. We must be able to we keep on supplying Ukraine with whatever arms we can with available means, given our imperfect political system, and we're able to. I am confident in the knowledge that the Ukrainians have thus far shown that they are able to make an absolute greater than expected use of whatever we give them. And so we speculate a lot in the West. Well, how will the Ukrainians use their Abrams once they get them? Or how will they use the F-16s once they get them? I contend that it does not matter in a larger sense, because the Ukrainians will make greater than expected use of what we do give them. And they are showing signs, as I said, in these recent days, just even today, that the Ukrainians are continuing to make progress and are on the verge of a significant operational breakthrough. And once they make that breakthrough, they will throw all these previous calculations about, Ukraine, this war may go on for years. No, I don't think so. I think that events will come to a head by the end of this year, once Ukraine is able to get within striking range of the Sea of Azov, within striking range of being able to cut the supply link and reinforcement link between Crimea and Russia. That's what their efforts are focused on. At the same time, their secondary efforts are designed in other areas of Ukraine, designed to keep the Russians off balance. Keep them off balance, keep throwing the jabs like a skilled boxer, keep them off balance so that the Russians cannot reinforce the critical areas of the front. And if they do try to pull from other areas of the front, the Ukrainians will simply make further progress in that area.
Jonathan, there is a certain trap where Joe Biden and people who make decisions. Actually, I was absolutely impressed with the speech of the U.S. Secretary Blinken a few days ago, and then it was surprisingly almost repeated, even with better effect by Joe Biden. Now, but the trap, in my opinion, is that if Ukrainians can do so well and get so much success without ATACMS and F-16s, so you have to be horrified what they're going to do if they will get ATACMS in a short time.
Well, if they get them, that will be based on the trends we're seeing and based on the historical performance thus far of the Ukrainian armed forces. They will take those additional weapons and they will integrate them in such a way into their offensive efforts that it will stretch the Russian forces to the breaking point. And
Jonathan, even if you take out all the geopolitical and political considerations, wouldn't be that great experiment to learn for Pentagon how to effectively use this great weaponry that the United States possesses, but because of lack of real wars, because neither Afghanistan or Iraq or all that stuff cannot be compared to what's happening now between Ukraine and Russia. So they would even learn something interesting lessons for modern war.
Well, the thing is, the United States Army has a lessons learned center. They have such a center which is designed to incorporate lessons learned from not only the United States' own conflicts, but from those involving other countries. And you can just bet your bottom dollar that the U.S. Army Lessons Learned Center and all those other centers which are designed to incorporate new insights from conflicts, they are taking very close note of what is going on in Ukraine. And they will be reporting this duly in subsequent reports following the end of this war, if not before, but that there are valuable lessons which the United States military can learn from this conflict and which they will, I can assure you, incorporate into any future planning or defense spending.
Okay, there are some U.S. politicians, I know about the fraction of Republicans, who want to stop completely any financing of Ukraine. The thing is that, okay, we've done enough, okay, good luck, let them fight, whatever it is, and so on. It's not even uh, to change American financial status in future at all, because we're talking about less than 5% of Pentagon budget going to Ukraine. That's not a big number, and it doesn't cost any human losses to United States either. At the same time, it helps to contain and maybe even to make Russia so much weaker that it will deter China to ever attack Taiwan. Because if Russia would be victorious and prevail in Ukraine, so then it would become obvious that they will join forces with China. And US will be very difficult to resist, and it will involve heavy commitment and possible losses to deal
Well,
with.
I agree, Sasha. That is why it is imperative that we give the Ukrainians whatever it is feasible for us to give them without taking undue risk, but still giving them what they need and counting on them to make maximum use of what they get, because a success in this conflict for NATO and the United States in defeating Russia's military and political goals will have a subsequent effect, deterring effect, I agree, on China. And China will be very loath to contemplate serious action against Taiwan if we have a forceful example to present to them as to the
Of course.
consequences of doing it.
And also it will become for example, coalition between China, Russia, maybe Iran, maybe North Korea, and so on, much more viable and much more aggressive. However, with the Russian defeat in Ukraine, there will be no such alliance, and Russia would walk away. Actually, Russians are walking away everywhere. Take Caucasus, where there is a tension and fights between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and Russia for many, many years was a supporter of Armenia. And Armenia did a lot of things that would probably not go ahead without Russian support. So now Russia walks away from that all. The Azerbaijan now, which has much stronger armies than Armenia, just dictates what they want to see to happen. Armenia already completely obliged with Azerbaijan demands. Russia is nowhere to be seen. So Russia is taking now beatings in international politics, because look at whom they're dealing with. North Korea begging for some ammunition or so on. It's Iran probably, it's drones. This is horrible. This is where Russia is losing any or all international prestige and power and perceived power. There's no power at all anymore. So nobody knows of all these intercontinental missiles, if they're still working, if they're still viable. Okay, the perception is probably they are, but to be sure about that, we have to see some evidence. We don't want to see it, frankly speaking. But I personally have serious doubts that they're in workable condition and could be used. But let's not go into the area where you don't want to find out what if you're wrong and they are viable and can fly after all. Okay, we don't see it. But now the latest what I read in Ukrainian press is that they are now going to, once the question was, now they're prepared that it will be a very long war, several years, anywhere from 5 to 10, if no longer. So now, first of all, there are some agreements being signed now about joint production of weapons between Ukraine and United States, which is very, very interesting development, which suits well if indeed it will be a long war. Now, second thing is that Ukraine is, after hopefully the ATACMS and F-16s will be decided in Ukrainian favor, I think in the worst case scenario, it will take another 6 months. maybe even 9 months, but essentially it will have to move. And in neither in 6 nor in 9 months, the war will be over. So Ukrainians now are saying that next, once all that accomplished, and the war is still going on, they would put on the agenda supplying Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles, which can fly several thousand kilometers, and which would make any point within Russia reachable. And Blinken, if you remember, mentioned that it's Ukrainian right to defend its territory and inflict damage on any Russian territory which involved in production of weapons and so on, with its own weapons or weapons acquired from the West. So this is now going to be lifted. All the conditions on the Western weapons not to be used against Russia on its own territory. So that is being lifted. And now, because Ukraine is already making so many attacks on so-called Russian territory, because Russia believes that Crimea is its territory, same as Moscow or St. Petersburg. So when Ukraine is attacking Crimea, in Russian minds, they're attacking Russia's own territory. And of course, Russia is responding with horrible atrocities. They're bombing peaceful Ukrainian city, killing people, making a lot of damage to the infrastructure, especially now that the winter is getting closer and closer. So the thing is that, to summarize, I would like to mention that simply on the front lines, Ukraine is getting successes daily. Russia is demonstrating absolutely nothing but complete disregard for international law order. It's killing its Ukrainian people and providing, essentially, it's nothing but genocide of Ukrainian population. And I hope that US and NATO will be even more resolved to helping Ukraine. By the way, Germany just announced a huge help package to Ukraine. And I think once all this fights in Congress will be over in the United States, there will be definitely much more help. Because from what I see, both Republicans and Democrats are committed to continue to help Ukraine. Jonathan, any comments?
Oh, I think you've summed it up pretty well. I think now the Ukrainian armed forces are, Ukraine as a whole is increasingly taking its destiny into its own hands. And they recognize that while they're not going to get everything they want, they have resolved that they are going to make absolute maximum use of what they do get in order to push Russia to the point where they can no longer hope to achieve anything on the battlefield, or for that matter, in the political arena that they cannot achieve otherwise. So this is, we are making steady progress. It's not as fast as some of the armchair generals and military experts in the West would like to think it is happening, but again, they don't get it their way. It's just not possible. So, and they're understandably cautious because these military experts and other experts, they don't like to look bad. They don't want to be seen as being obviously wrong or miscalculating. So naturally, they're going to be very cautious. So that's just human nature. But in any case, we have been watching this. You and Ivan and I have been watching this all along, and watching the Ukrainians successfully adapt to their circumstances. And I'm increasingly optimistic that Ukraine will successfully defend its sovereignty and defeat Russia's operational and political objectives and force Vladimir Putin to retreat.
Yes, Jonathan, totally agree with you. And we'll see you. Thank you so much for today's program. We'll see you. Hopefully, Ivan will join us back. on Tuesday, same place, same time. Have a great week, and glory to Ukraine. Thank you very much, everybody.